Isn't it weird how one day you grow up and there's no longer someone there to parent you or to tell you what to do? And all of a sudden, you have to be an adult when you've never been an adult before. And you essentially have to parent yourself. But then when you go to parent yourself, you realize that some of the ways your parents parented you were less than ideal. And some of the ways that taking care of yourself perhaps was modeled for you was also less than ideal. And all of a sudden, you are faced with this task of having to be your own parent and having to manage your life and having to get in touch with your needs and figure out if you need a bubble bath or discipline or a walk or time with friends. Like, you have to suddenly figure out your needs and be in touch with yourself and have this loving relationship with yourself, right? If you want a happy, successful life, when you have no idea how to do that, when you have no idea how to be kind to yourself and not beat yourself up and how to parent yourself. And that was something that I struggled with for the longest time. I used to beat myself up in my head all day, every day. I used to tie a lot of my identity to my productivity and all of these other external markers instead of knowing how to have a relationship with myself or knowing how to answer the question, what do I need right now? And so I've gone on a journey the last few years of figuring out how to do that and figuring out how to develop my own inner mother voice and how to parent myself from a place of the way that I wish I was parented. And so today we are going to talk all about that. We're going to talk all about reparenting yourself and how to develop that self-relationship between your inner mother and your inner child so that no one part of you is feeling imbalanced or running the show. Because I used to notice, and I have a clip about this on Instagram that went really viral, so I know it resonates with people, but I used to notice that when my inner child was neglected and I wasn't experiencing enough joy or play or creativity, all of a sudden I would want to rebel against discipline and I would want to just kind of like goof off all day and not do my work, and I would procrastinate, and it created a lot of issues for me in my life. And yet the more I would beat myself up for procrastinating, the worse my procrastination would get. So when I switched my method to having compassion for my inner child and kind of like talking to myself, talking to her from a true loving inner mother compassionate way, getting curious about what her needs might be instead of beating her up, I realized that was a much better way to solve a lot of my self-sabotaging or rebellious behaviors. I just had parts of me that needed to be seen and loved and nurtured and parented. And we all do. That is the ultimate task of adulthood, is not just parenting our children or our potential future children, but parenting ourselves. I'm going to talk all about that in this episode today, my journey with it, what the turning point was for me, and I hope this inspires you to have more compassion for your inner child and find your own inner mother. Let's get into it. Let's talk real life, right? I think the best way to move through life is to always be the student and to always be curious. Life will show you either way. It's just how you choose to listen. You can always count on you. You will always have your own back. This is not the last thing you'll create. Play is the process, but sometimes it has to be dramatic. That's the funny part. When your back's up against the wall, you will prevail. You're allowed to grow and change. You are allowed to birth something new. I hope you make your art. Originally, I had kicked off the Instagram series that I did have so much fun with by kind of teasing to people that I was going to take a risk and do something that was entirely different from my normal identity. And it was really helpful that in season 5, I had recorded with Madison Utendall, and we did this whole episode about how important it is to derive your worth outside of your productivity and outside of your work identity, so that you are not just in your mind a worker, and the days in which you are not working, you can actually feel good about yourself. Because those of us who are recovering workaholics or recovering productivity identifiers know the feeling of what happens when it's a weekend and you don't have a job to do. And you don't have a to-do list, and you don't have someone telling you how to spend your time. And there are no external markers by which to say, I deserve to live today. Like, my doctor, it's so funny, she's been such a big mentor for me, but Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, she just saw all of these things in me because she's been through it herself. And she was like, you need to start naming these parts of you. She said, you know what I call that part? Weekend Wendy. She's like, Weekend Wendy is out to play. And Weekend Wendy only gets her worth from being productive and, being in her work identity. And so she's going to start raging on everyone around her or spiraling or convincing herself that she has no worth in the world and being depressed. And then all of a sudden on Monday, she's okay because she's working. And it's like her vice. And I was like, yeah, how did you just read me to filth? But that's just such a common shared experience for those of us who, for many reasons, felt unsafe for much of our lives, whether it was emotionally, physically, financially, all the things. And thus, we're smart beings, right? We're incredibly capable and intelligent. So our bodies are going to get that safety and that regulation whichever ways they can. For me, it was drugs and working, right? It was like cannabis and working. I'm just going to work high. That's going to really do it, But it's like, that's why I have so much compassion for like the addiction and the substance piece, because your brain is just doing whatever it knows how to do to feel better. So of course, we're going to try to derive our worth from that because it's something outside of ourselves that we can tangibly see and hold on to until we learn how to cultivate that sense of worth from within us. My other favorite part of this is that it lines up to my philosophies that I've learned from Courage to be Disliked, which is that it's so important to know that your worth comes from just trying earnestly to make a contribution in this world, whether that contribution looks like productivity and to-do list items checked off a box or not. You just have to know that you showed up today and did whatever you could to move towards some kind of thing that your heart is telling you to do to be of service. And even if that looks like resting that day, if that's what you need to do to take one step forward to get yourself in a place where you can be of contribution, you can thus feel good about the resting because no one else gets to say whether that rest was productive or not. And it doesn't need to be immediately productive. It just needs to be whatever you need in that moment to be a safe, whole human. And I asked everyone, what can you explore or try or play with this year in order to meet a part of you outside of your work identity? This part of you that is willing to play and have hobbies and that is this multifaceted person. We are multi-hyphenates and we have to allow ourselves to continue to branch out and be big and be complex. And so I got a lot of answers from people that were like, I'm going to start taking pottery lessons again. That really just like lit something up inside of me and helped me just get in there with my hands and be free and get dirty. And I just got lost in it. It was just so nice to not think about time for a few hours. And I think that's a really good sign that you're doing something that's soul nourishing and playful. And whenever you're transcending time, it's like you're not commodifying your time to see how productive you can be with it. So that's always a good sign. Some people were saying, I'm a mom and I'm really busy right now. So I'm just going to commit to 30 minutes a day for myself to do whatever I need to do. And I'm like, yes, absolutely. That's where it starts. And I'm getting all these answers, but I also got a lot of answers that were, this question is making me so uncomfortable because I don't know where to start. This, it stopped me in my tracks to read this because I've never even thought about what I like to do outside of work, or I've never even allowed myself to go there, or I don't know what I want to do for fun, or I don't know what I'm interested in. Like life feels flat to me. I don't have interests, right? Like it's the who am I question, right? Which is this journey that I've gone on and that I think we all need to go on. Who am I outside of everything else? If everything else went poof today, my job, my this, my that, my boyfriend, whatever, who am I and would I still be okay? Because I know myself and I'm my own friend. So whenever someone's meeting that question with a lot of resistance, I see that there's this opportunity for them to go on this who am I journey and start developing a relationship with themselves. And then the question is, how the heck do you do that? Where do you start? And that's the same question they're asking with, what if I don't know what I want to do or what I want to try outside of work? Like, how do I find that out? And so immediately that led me to letting them know that they're not alone. I mean, my entire experience in young adulthood, because I think there was a time, like once I really entered the workforce and left home, maybe, I think when I was at home, I still had a little bit of like a creativity bone in me, or I still had a little bit of a sense of freedom and safety because like you're like in the nest, you don't got bills and whatnot. But once I moved out, and it was me against the world. And I really had to hunker down and provide for myself. And I really just like wanted freedom. That was really my goal. I just wanted to make a life where I could have some freedom because I just never felt that growing up. and financially never felt that. My parents were paycheck to paycheck. My mom had a lot of debt. And same with my now husband, like he grew up a very similar way. And so we were just like, we're going to do whatever it takes to make it. But that led to like my creativity being shut down and me going into go mode. And during that time, I just kind of became in many ways super successful, but also was like, smoking a lot of weed, really a lot of internal pressure. The bigger things get, the more stress there is, more money, more problems kind of vibe. And I would say so many times during that era of my life, I just don't know how to have fun. And my mom would say it my whole life. I'll never forget how many times she would tell me fun. Like, I don't know what that is. My mom only knew work. Both my parents only knew work because they were so in survival mode. And that's just like all there was. And they traded everything for work, like time cooking. We'll just do convenience foods so that I can work more. We never took a family vacation. I never went on vacation with my parents in my life. So basically, I told people I resonate with this feeling of I don't know how to have fun because you can get so lost in the sauce. Life can have so much pressure when you're out on your own. And sometimes it's funny because when you're growing up and you have conflict in your home and you kind of like have a parent or two to fight against, it's almost a little bit easier because you get to fight for yourself and, well, I have something to prove and there's a reason for you to go on almost. And then when you're out on your own and there's no one else to fight against, it's like it's a weird phenomenon. You have to find a reason to then fight for yourself. And when you spent your whole life fighting against someone else and your identity came from proving someone else wrong or surviving, there is no sense of self really to fight for. There is no relationship with the self. There is no one here that you like, that you want to fight for. You go from experiencing like some form of abuse, let's say like verbal abuse, to like being your own abuser. And you think that that's the tactic that you have to keep using on yourself to keep moving forward because you heard that from a parent and you're like, I'm going to prove you wrong at all costs. And so that's the only coping mechanism that you know. That's the only way that you know to motivate yourself is to beat yourself up and be mean to yourself. That's just what always worked. So why wouldn't it work now? And because there's no intrinsic sense of self-worth, you begin to, of course, like just do what you saw in your home or do what society tells you, which is to look for that worth outside of yourself and the proof of that worth in external measures, productivity, success, finances, whatever it is. And you just go towards that. And that's where Weekend Wendy starts to show the fragmentation, starts to show that, hey, work can't be all the time. And so when it is time for you to just be a human on the weekends, there's all these parts of you that are crying that as soon as the work noise stops, all of these other parts pipe up and are wailing at you. And you have such a deep sense of sadness and fragmentation inside of you. And of course, you don't know how to have fun and they're begging you to have fun, but now you feel so far away from those parts because you've just been focusing on the part that says we have to be productive to be worthy. The manager part is what I like to call it in internal family systems. If you break up your parts into like a family of people, there's a manager who learned that in order to earn your keep in this world and in order to protect that lack of sense of self, you have to just keep trucking on and show up and perform and get those external signs that you are worthy to just keep going on. But all those other parts of you that are you, that are your truest self, your inner child, your artist, the part of you that like to just play or sing songs in your room, like you haven't left any space for those parts in so long that they are crying. And so you feel this extreme emotional turmoil constantly underneath the surface, even when things are going well, even when you're experiencing all the success in the world. And that's because you're not experiencing this full integration of all these parts of you and this full integration of the self. Unfortunately, it can be really jarring when you feel so disconnected from the part of you that likes to have fun and just likes to play. And a lot of it is from this conditioning of learning that it's not safe to play because your time has to be used to be productive, to get that self-worth. And it's a process to unlearn that and to decondition it. And it's a process to build more specifically the sense of self and the self-esteem to where you even feel like you have a self outside of the commodified version of you that is just here to perform and work. And so someone said, okay, I'm resonating with this. I'm recognizing that I don't know how to have fun or where to start. How can I even take step one of being curious about where I might have fun? How can I get an idea, a compass? And I was like, your inner child, she's got you. Like, she remembers, she knows. And that is how we got to the topic of inner child. It was like the all way around of the worth through productivity, self-identity conversation. And it landed at inner child. That is phase one. That is the way in. As soon as you gain an awareness around, oh, I'm doing this thing. I'm doing this. My worth is productivity and work thing. I consciously now want to take a step forward to discover these other parts of me. I'm ready. When that happens, you're there. That's your way in. And you just try to start with your inner child. And I think awareness is so special. Like, that's why questioning your behavior and constantly being curious around your own behavior. Why is it that I feel so depressed on the weekends when I'm not working? Why is it that, if this one work project doesn't go right, I'm a complete mess? Why is it that I feel so tied to these external measures of success and have such a sense of unrest inside of my soul, even though my family's healthy and I'm safe and I'm okay and like all the things? Why is it that it never feels like enough, right? Like, just starting to ask yourself those questions and get curious by your own feelings and behavior is how you arrive at that stage one level of awareness and want to make that change. And as soon as something is in your awareness, it can be changed. So I think like curiosity is just the way through on this human journey and always will be. And then we get to the inner child. And then you have to start doing the work that is not going to feel like work. It's going to feel uncomfortable. It's going to feel like you're wasting your time. It's going to feel silly and fruitless. But the work is to be with your inner child, to do the things that she liked to do when you were growing up. And let's say your inner child really liked to paint and really liked to sing. If you haven't done those things in 20 years, it's not like you're going to just day one, once you realize you're a workaholic, like sit down and paint a Picasso, right? You might not even feel comfortable doing that. You might have way too much resistance and cognitive dissonance. So where I started and where I suggest people start is to just do the things that your inner child liked to do when she was like in her room alone. So you can just start to get into the mindset and just start to like sit next to her. And what interestingly kicked it off for me was just reading fiction books again. Because I didn't realize when I was little, I loved just getting lost in fiction. I loved Nancy Drew. I loved I would just read and read and read for hours. And somewhere along the way, I decided, of course, through this conditioning, that it is a waste of my commodifiable time to read a fiction book. The only books I will be reading are books that are educational and can further me in my field and blah, 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 blah. And I just decided that reading for pleasure and for imagination and being silly and being a little kid who likes a drama and like a little romantic drama is a waste of time. And so I started with just reading Elin Hilderbrand. Shout out to you, my girl. I'm so obsessed with this woman. Her books are like the simplest, easiest, most mindless reads, but for whatever reason, they just unlocked the sense of joy in me. And I felt so guilty at first to be spending this time reading these books. And it was really uncomfortable and it was really hard. But I just little by little found myself, once I even just made that conscious decision of like, I want to meet my inner child or spend more time with her. Once I started to visualize her, ask her what she needed, remember what she liked to wear, it almost all started to come back to me. Just again, the power of awareness. And I remembered that, yeah, my inner child liked to read fiction books. My inner child also used to really like to wear crazy outfits, really intense, crazy outfits, to the point where that could fly in elementary school because I went to like a school for the gifted and talented. So all of us were a little off. But then I hit middle school, public middle school in Yonkers, New York. That was not going to fly whatsoever for a single second. I used to spend an extra 45 minutes in the morning. And this is where the art of the long morning routine originated. So the lore is really being illuminated. But I used to wake up earlier than like my parents so that I can start doing a weird hairdo to get ready for the day. And so I would go to school that way because I thought it was so fun. I really belonged in New York City. I was truly just like such a city gal. And I had these, fake Converse that were knee high. And so they were neon pink, knee high, had like bubbles and blobs of neon green on them. And I would wear those with like a striped skirt and like a bright colored top. My goal was like, how buck wild could I be? How much could I express this like art inside of me in my outfits? I had such a fun time. My mom could not get me to stop wearing crazy outfits as a kid. She just gave up. She was like, fine, you want to wear a tutu to the store? You can be embarrassed when you're in the store and everyone's looking at you and then you'll see. Like I would fight her. And that's just always who I was. And as I was thinking back and being like, oh yeah, like that's how I like to dress. I remembered in 6th grade, I started to get bullied for that, of course, because it's, public school, whatever. And I got smart real quick. And I was like, nope, I am going to have my mom take me to Pepe Jeans. I'm going to get myself like some urban clothing, a pair of real jeans and like, white tees, what all the girls are wearing with like the matching belts and the scrunched hair. And just, it was like a phase that we had in Yonkers in New York. But I wore jeans to school for the first time. And my teachers took me to the side. There was these 2 teachers who always really helped me out. And they were like, what are you doing wearing jeans? And I was like, I get bullied. I'm not going to continue wearing my weird clothing. It's not worth it. And they were like, please don't do this. Like, please don't lose who you really are and become like everyone else. And I just told them it's too late. It's done. Like I've already decided. And from that day on, I really did just kind of dress however other people would like, and I didn't even realize that until I looked back. And interestingly, the other day, a friend that was in my 6th grade class said, do you remember how that teacher used to have you sing opera for the class? And I totally forgot that. But like those teachers really saw me. They really saw my inner child and the things that she loved and like the gifts that she was willing to share and tried so badly to nurture that. And because those were the things that made me different, I shut them down. Because I'm like, well, the weird girl that sings Italian opera and wears neon Converse, it's a lot easier to just fit in and not be those things. And I think as we get older, we make ourselves small and we don't want to be different. But those are the things that we're meant to share with the world. That's where we find our gifts and our magic. So that was a piece of it, alongside reading fiction books. I thought about the fashion piece and like the expression through my clothing. And I realized how, because that was suppressed so much in my adult life, it actually manifested as like a pathological like shopping issue. And I would just over shop and over consume, like trying to find the perfect outfits instead of actually having fun with my closet. And I went on this whole journey during my Vices year where I also examined my shopping. And I've never really necessarily talked about this before because it didn't feel as potent as like a drug. But I learned all of these things as I, again, questioned my behavior. Why do I sit there for hours saying this will be the perfect outfit that makes me feel good, or this will make me feel enough? And it never is. And why do I keep lying to myself that it will be and that the next purchase will make me happy when it never does and it's never enough? And I realized that that art form became twisted and became another consume, produce, like Western society kind of thing that was just tied to like acquiring something, buying something, being productive. Like it all like almost gets twisted into this weird capitalistic thing. Like all of our art gets twisted in that way. And so I realized so much of my compulsive need to shop was from that inner child really wanting to express through her outfits. But because of how, again, our society is, we think that to have more fun with our clothing, we need to buy more, when in reality, we need to spend the time to play dress up with what we already have. How many of us spend 5 hours shopping one day in New York City to find a new outfit for a party when if we just let our inner child play in our closet for 5 hours and try weird combinations that were unexpected and try to cut this way and tie this way, we would find the coolest combinations. And it would be so much truer to us because we have clothes that we already like. And so I'm like, ooh, yeah, like I've been denying my inner child to commodify my time to make money to then spend that money trying to find my inner child. Like, what? So that was a really interesting journey for me. And again, it can just be that simple that it starts with a fiction book. And I also want to note that another way in with my inner child was through my dog. And I think that it's almost inevitable in a way, like when your inner child calls you and wants to find you, and when you're meant to like meet her, when you're in that phase, the universe will send you ways to find her. And I really feel like the universe sent me Banks. Like he is my soul dog in so many ways. In the cannabis episode, we talked about how he was essentially the reason that Nick couldn't come to California with me and I had to quit cannabis and quit my codependence on Nick. Like his presence in my life triggered so many of these events. And that's, I think, what I've heard from my psychic and my spiritual advisors. That's how dogs work. They are like angels and they come into your life to really make some big shifts. And I do notice that since I got Banks, this part of me, not only my inner child, which is the part of me that can actually play, because it was so much easier to play with him first before I was comfortable playing with myself again. That part came out and got to be exercised because he just was so full of love and joy and he was just a baby and I just wanted to genuinely play with him. And then also not only did that inner child part come out, but also my inner mother came out as well. And for the first time, like I accessed this wiser archetype within me that found it natural to just nurture something and unconditionally love it. It was this part of me that I had never met before that I loved so much. Like I loved the person that I became when I was taking care of Banks and once Banks was in my life. Like, so I think that's where animals and where even having children can help to also usher us. It doesn't even need to be like our own dedication to the work of like sitting there, reading fiction books, making art. It also can be that this discovery or this journey back to your inner child happens because of the amazing gifts that come into your life, like your children or your animals. The same with children, like all of a sudden you become this little kid again who's playing with them, or you become this mother who didn't even know you had that instinct in you. I remember my sister-in-law, I was at her house and I was so intense about Banks as a baby. Like I had to make sure I watched him when he was outside peeing and that I was so doting over him. And I think in the past, it's like, I've talked about this before, the self-centeredness as like a self-preservation tactic, but I don't know if people in my life ever saw me care about something other than myself in that way. You know what I mean? Like in a really self-honest kind of way. And she was taking pictures of me as I was like outside with like the umbrella over Banks following him because she's like, I've just never seen this side of you. So that's how much of a shift that made. And that's how much that unlocked my inner mother. And I think that kicked off the journey because once he was in my life, I all of a sudden had this strength and this courage to ask, who am I? To go back to the fiction books, to start to discover this road back to my inner child before I even knew I was going there.
Have you ever encountered the feeling of being angry that somebody wants you to take care of something? What would you associate that to in Parks' work?
Number one, so valid to be absolutely spent of being the inappropriate caretaker of something or someone in your life. That is all too often people's experience because when they were young, they had to parent their parents or they were asked to take on things that simply were too big for a child to take on, or they feel like they have too much on their shoulders with the way in which one must often work today in order to pay bills and provide for themselves. Super, super valid. I think that comes down to separation of tasks. I feel like you only get angry and resentful when you're asked to take on a task of love, right? A task of showing up for someone else in a relationship, caring for someone else in a relationship when it shouldn't be yours. And I have a friend who, for example, Her mom got into a bad car accident when she was very young, when she was in her like early teens. And because her mom was totally incapacitated basically and disabled, she had to become the female leader of the household. And I see how today that makes her very hesitant to take on more responsibilities because she feels like she's just now getting a chance to live. She's just now getting a chance to live her life and to have the freedom that was taken from her as a child, because at that age, it is too much to ask of a child to start to make these adult decisions and start to take care of your little brother and send him to school and do all these things and essentially become a parent. So I can absolutely understand that sentiment and that feeling. But I would perhaps challenge that by saying, yes, and what if taking on a responsibility that you get to choose, that is your task and will be so rewarding tenfold because of who you become in the face of that responsibility, even though it's going to be hard, even though it's going to be painstaking, and you're going to be up all night with a kid and a toddler and all the things. What if that is actually the way through to get to meet this next version of yourself that experiences a sense of restfulness in their soul that simply like resting alone won't give you? Because I think that responsibility, we look at it as a bad thing or something that we can't handle or a burden. But I actually think responsibility has been one of the most, and again, this is chosen responsibility, not an unfair responsibility that's put onto you, but a chosen responsibility of, I really want to have an animal. I really want to have a child. I want to expand my family, that kind of responsibility. It's been such a way in to these higher parts of myself. And it's really like this divine path, again, because of who you become when you show up, and also the benefits you get to reap when you give to another person or another thing. Like, the magic is in the giving. We actually think it's going to be a burden to have to give, but that is the beautiful part of it all. It's like, even when we got Banks, I was like, how could I have this puppy when I run this business and it's in such a big growth phase and all these different people need me and my parent is sick and they need me and all the things. Like, I can't handle this. I was going to literally just take care of Banks for 2 days and then find him a home because he came to our doorstep unexpectedly. And I said, I can't take on this responsibility. And yet you find the space. And that's what everyone who accidentally gets pregnant or whatever often says, is like, you think you're never ready, but somehow you just find a way. And when you do, you realize that your quality of life, even with the added responsibility, is 10x from what it used to be, because we're born to be that for each other. We're born to take on responsibility. And you know, in many ways, the actions that you must fulfill to be responsible help you to be proud of yourself, help you to build character, help you to feel that you're making a contribution to a community, which could exist with just you and that person. Let's say you're a single mother and it's just you and that child. It only takes 2 people to make a community. So you get this feeling that you can't get from anything else, that you've been of service that day, that you've made a contribution just by showing up for that person that depends on you. And it's the most like beautiful, precious way to build self-esteem. And the actions that you have to take to fill out that responsibility, for example, walking your dog, ends up benefiting you. You end up getting your steps in from those walks. You end up going out into fresh air because they have this need, and because often you won't do it for yourself, but you'll do it for them. You end up cooking healthier food because you want your kid to eat better and not have as much takeout, and you end up benefiting from that. Like, responsibility calls us higher. It calls us into this higher version of ourselves. It gives us a reason to step forward. It gives us meaning. And through that meaning, we become a person that we can be really proud of. And so, as much as responsibility is an added layer and may feel like a burden at first and can have very real, sleep deprivation, all the things, financial changes, I think that you, when you choose it, or when you choose to embrace it, again, if it's an accidental pregnancy or something like that, you end up getting the best of it.
You're basically saying positives will come out of pain, which is true. That pain will bring positives. But how do you think when you're sitting in that pain, like somebody is sitting in that pain and their nervous system is so overstimulated because the dog that wants to be walked is taking something from them that day, and they feel that it's something that's happening to them.
Yeah.
And they're trying to regulate out of it and they can't get there. How would you say, like, what are the steps in your body that you would take to be like, it's not about me today to do that?
I would say, what if this dog asking you to be present with it is the only way that you would actually be present? You know, sometimes people will say, I don't want to take the dog with us when we go to the farmer's market because they're going to slow us down, right? They're going to want to sniff everything. They're going to want to stop and say hi to everybody. What if that's the point? What if that's the whole reason that having this dog in your life is amazing, is that they do force you to take breaks. They do force you to be like, I'm overstimulated right now. And you know what? This work thing can wait. This like deadline that I'm freaking out over, I can just say, you know what? I need 20 minutes to go take this dog on a walk, and I'll come back to my desk in 20 minutes and I'll figure it out. Or I'm just going to write my boss a note, or I'm going to just find a way to decenter all of these other things that I'm thinking are really immensely important that I perhaps could shuffle around. We often like think that we can't, but there are so many more possibilities than we realize if we ask, if we try, if we choose to do things differently, if we even stop and take that 20-minute walk. And by way of the dog, like demanding that of us, our mind is clearer after that walk and we're more productive with our work in the next hour than we would have been if we just stayed in that state of overstimulation and didn't take the break. You just never know like why that thing was sent to you. You know what I mean? Like I think we think about the downsides more than we think about the beauty of it all and how that could be exactly what we needed, even though it doesn't feel like that at the moment.
What would you just say to somebody who is trying to form a relationship with their inner mother? It's just not connecting.
The whole thing is that the way to develop this integrated and healthy relationship with the inner child, where they're not totally ignored, but they also don't get to completely run the show, is to then develop your relationship with your inner mother, right? The awareness of the inner child comes first, the exploration, starting to spend a little bit more time with her, starting to see her, starting to see what she may need. That comes first. And then you step into, okay, I need to really be able to move from and get to know my inner mother in order to have a healthy relationship with my inner child that allows me to benefit from my inner child and all that she has to give me in her art and her creativity. Because I find that when the inner child is completely ignored, as mine was when I was in my productivity is everything work mode, she's either like completely suppressed and you can have no fun in the world, or it's like all work and you're miserable, or you'll find that she starts to rebel and then your inner child is fighting back and you lose control. Like you almost can't have this internal, we're having no fun life forever. Your inner child's going to start rebelling and want to binge eat ice cream or because she doesn't feel safe, because you don't feel integrated, because your nervous system is dysregulated, because you're denying a part of yourself, because you're denying creative outlets. And she's going to want to do all of these things that are like kind of another form of an extreme, because suppressing her is one side of an extreme. And then when she's acting out and running the show and you're like picking fights with your partner and you're kind of sounding like your inner child who's emotionally wounded and not getting seen or loved, or you're again like participating in destructive escapist kind of behaviors. Like I'm sure my inner child was loving being high all the time because that's the only time I got to play or be relaxed. Like she was so much of the reason behind my extremes because she wasn't integrated and she didn't have a guide that could actually sit with her and witness her and see her, but also discipline her. And so that's where I realized, oh my goodness, I have to now become my own inner mother, because only my own inner mother can give her all the things that she didn't get from her mother, maybe. And it's my job now to parent her. And so this concept of reparenting, I started to hear about reparenting from people like the holistic psychologist and a lot of these pop psychologists on Instagram. And I was like, whoa, what a concept. You know, you could reparent yourself. And I realized that in many ways, Nick had reparented me for a long time. He was able to just provide me this level of like unconditional love that again wasn't based on my performance like it was as a kid when I had to perform academically and all the things, that wasn't based on anything, where I could act out completely and I could be mean to him and all the things, and he still just gave me this unconditional love and like a parent I never had. And in so many ways, like he almost was my blueprint for the inner mother and like started to heal me in that sense. And that is the power of relationship. And again, why humans need each other. But I digress. So then I started thinking about, okay, the inner mother. And because my inner child was so tired of the manager always being in control. And yes, discipline felt like a really bad thing. I associated discipline with lack of freedom, with, all of these things, with mom being mean, yada, yada, yada. It was certainly interesting at first. And you kind of have to go through the motions at first until you can start to believe it. So when you asked the question earlier, I thought about like why we would associate a mother disciplining us as something that's like bad or mean. And I thought about like, those kids that like just came from a really good home. You ever know one of those, those unicorns? And where like you've been at their house and their mom is like, okay, but gotta just do the dishes first, or just make sure you clean up your room. Okay, honey. And they're like, absolutely, mom. Like their mom was just so nice to them that when their mother is disciplining them, again, in like a respectful, we're equals way, and like, you got to do this, but thank you for doing it kind of thing, they just were glad to do it. And they always kept their room clean. And like they had this sense of self-worth where they wanted to keep their room clean so they could contribute to the family because their family was nice to them. And they weren't like, it was this foreign land. And so I think that maybe subconsciously was the blueprint that I was trying to go towards, of when my inner mother is nice to me and parents me in this really kind way and doesn't use that mean voice that my mom used towards me that I then started using towards myself, right? When I choose to reparent myself in that way, in that kind, respectful, I see you, I understand you, I know why you don't want to do the dishes right now. I completely understand why you're feeling so overwhelmed and that things don't feel safe right now. Can we like sit for 5 minutes and just like put our hand over our heart and then get up and try to just wash a few dishes? When I change that internal voice to how I would assume those healthy, well-adjusted families spoke to one another, that's when everything kind of started to change. But also I didn't have modeling for that. So I was talking about this earlier and I was realizing that being kind to myself still felt too foreign to me at first. I couldn't access that kind inner mother voice right away because, again, I didn't have the sense of self or the self-worth where I felt like I was someone worth being kind to. So I had to almost think of it, and maybe this is crazy, but I had to think of it in this really distant way. And I had to almost look at my behaviors and the way that I was parenting myself or the way that I was treating myself from a third party view. So I just started by asking, would I, for example, like I knew my breakfast habit was something that was dire for me. That was like where I wanted to start with reparenting myself and just disciplining myself so that I could have a clearer mind, so that I could make better decisions, so that I could be nicer to myself, so that I could sleep better. Like I just needed a place to start because the inner mother's job and like our higher self's job is to do what's best for us and create a foundation in which we can then have the safety to self-actualize and grow and meet the inner child and make art and all the things. But we got to have the safety first. So I realized that food and nutrition was a big part of it. And because I didn't feel worthy, I was treating myself like crap and I was skipping breakfast in the mornings. And so much of that was body image based and again, very shameful. Well, if you don't deserve to eat breakfast and you need to earn your calories and this and that. And of course that always led to binging and eating something later because I was starving. Like it never worked, but we think the shame voice thinks it's going to work. And so I asked myself, would I do that to a child, right? If I was a child, a separate person who is a child, if I was someone who had worth, because right now I don't feel like I have worth. So if I was a person who had worth, would I skip breakfast, wait till I was extremely dysregulated and sweating like crazy from my armpits and feeling anxious, and then grab a quick either pick me up in the form of a sugary coffee or in the form of a muffin or something like a quick source of sugar, and then later have a crash or be bouncing off the walls and be dysregulated for the whole day. If I really thought about how I would set a child up for a successful day at kindergarten, would I not give them a balanced breakfast in the morning? Would I be like, you can just go and fend for yourself, or let me give you something sugary and now you're going to fly off the walls every, 2 seconds? Like, that's just not what you would do for someone that you care about. And so again, because I couldn't care about myself yet, I just placed myself in that child's shoes. And I said, what if I today fed myself the way I would feed a child who's not me? Again, it had to be really separate at first, because it's too painful to try to treat yourself with love when you really don't love yourself. It's just so hard. So I just started there. And what you find is, when you do every single thing, like, okay, I really don't want to get up and brush my teeth right now, but would I let my child go to sleep without brushing their teeth? Okay, I really don't want to do my laundry right now, but would I let a child live without clean clothes? And you just start to do things from that lens. All of a sudden you find that you start to do them because it's for someone else in the distance, right? But because you start to do them, you start to inadvertently take care of yourself. And then through those loving actions, through that loving care, you start to prove to yourself that you are someone worth taking care of. And you start to prove to yourself that you can do those things required to treat yourself with respect. And through those esteemable acts, those little things as simple as making sure you eat a protein-rich breakfast, or making sure that you take a walk, or making sure that you go outside to get fresh air, or whatever you would do for a child who you could see was struggling, who you could see didn't want to be at a computer for 8 hours without a break. Whatever you would do to show grace and compassion to that child, is when you did that, that was an estimable act that you could be proud of. And I found over time that those compound, and estimable acts really do start to build your self-esteem. And then what happens when you have self-esteem? All of a sudden, you become a person that you feel is worth taking care of. And it's a lot easier to start to speak to yourself a little bit nicer. And then you get to like move a little bit more from that softer inner mother. That voice becomes a little bit more natural to you because it doesn't feel so opposite to what your truth is inside of you. Things start to feel more integrated, and you can say to yourself directly, not if I was a child, but if I was me, if I know that this past week, I really felt good when I had that, protein-rich breakfast every day. Can I give that to myself again, even though I'm really tired and I don't feel like it? Can I just do it? And I would do it. And even when my child would have tantrums, right? My inner child would have tantrums when she would say, but we're so tired and we've been so good all week. And, like I ate so perfect this week. Can't I just have ice cream? I would literally start to talk to myself. I would lay in bed at night with myself, or I would take a moment to just lay down when I would start having like an internal tantrum. And I would literally sit there and rub my heart, and I would be like, it's okay. I'm with you. I'm here. I love you. Like, I see you. And it's stuff like that. It's stuff that like, that doesn't feel like the hard work that one has to do to move forward in life and be successful. But me laying on my bed with my hand on my heart saying, it's okay, sweetie. I love you. I'm here. I see you, was the work I needed to do to be more successful and get to the next level of my life inadvertently. Like, wild. That's the stuff. And it feels really weird at first. And it feels out of touch. And it feels like, am I really doing this? Am I really like talking to myself like a baby? But it's wild what happens to like that sense of safety when you do those things. And I would say, okay, what if we just had a little bit of a healthy snack first, or like, had a meat stick just to get a little protein in there. And then if you still want the ice cream afterwards, we can do it intentionally, and we can make it a fun date, and we can go together, and we can enjoy the sights and the sounds and the car ride and play some music and go and intentionally get a scoop of ice cream and make this a moment where we can spend time together. And just that, even just the compromise of the discipline of let's have a healthy snack first so that we're not going into this and having a blood sugar spike, that part felt really good because it was like, again, an esteemable act. It was something I could be really proud that I did. But I was also still allowing myself grace for, it's your choice. If you still want to get the ice cream, we can. You might find that you don't want it anymore because you were just hungry and that's why you wanted the sweets. But if you still want it, let's do it intentionally. And that was a big part for me too of how I stopped binge eating, because I found that it was the lack of like mindfulness and intention and ritual around the practice of sitting down with food that I loved and absolutely could eat if I wanted to and deserved to eat, because you don't have to do anything to deserve food. But when I was doing it from that place of just not even spending a moment to talk to myself and get clear on what I was feeling or where the emotion was coming from, or take a beat, and I was just going right into the ice cream drawer, then I was just eating a whole pint, because it was like there was no regulation. There was no acknowledgement of like, there's a person here who's feeling things, and let's just talk to her for a second because she deserves to be acknowledged and witnessed. And it was like bringing that habit out of the dark, making that act of eating the ice cream okay, and also making it celebratory and fun and something that I got to do to take myself out on a date, versus doing it in the shadows and like hiding in my room eating ice cream. Like even that was a whole different relationship. And that was what I wanted for my inner child. And that's what I wish my inner child had, because I did just eat ice cream in my room as a kid when I was feeling sad. And I didn't have someone there saying like, I feel like you've had a really hard day today. Do you want to talk about it over some ice cream? We can go out. And like, I just didn't get that. So I just realized that I had the power to be that person for me. And when you become an adult, that's something you have to reckon with, that you are now your own person. You're no longer in your parents' home. You're no longer the responsibility of your parents. And whether your actual mother or father did or did not show up for you, did or did not give you the attunement and the witnessing and the co-regulation that you needed, even if they traumatized you, it is now your job to parent yourself the way that you wish that they did. And you can do it. It's just going to be a bit of a discovery, and you're going to have to maybe fake it until you make it at first and go through the motions and make yourself that separate child. And you are starting from scratch because you didn't have that modeling. And so give yourself grace when you're not perfect every time. It took me years. But once you take on that responsibility, which is what I mean about how beautiful and freeing actually responsibility can be. Once you have that personal ownership that like, this is my job and no one else's, and I can't continue to blame the shortcomings of my parent, because even though that sucked and it hurt and it was really hard and it left me perhaps in a much worse place than Bob over there, it's still now my job to do things differently and to choose to be the parent that I needed.
How do you hear your inner mother now when you have to make really hard decisions?
I think there's just a lot of, it's okay, I'm with you. Like that stayed with me so much. Just that co-regulating that I didn't always receive, because a lot of us had a parent who would like fly because they were so emotionally dysregulated. And I see it in my dad now, and I think I can actually see it clearly because I've grown so much from that place. And I certainly used to be this way, where immediately my inner child would respond to an emergency, or my inner teenager or my inner manager would respond to an emergency versus my inner mother responding. But I see my dad being so at the whim of his emotions, and I see how much the emotion of the thing that's happening at this very moment determines his entire reality of the rest of life. You know, it's like that's such a hard place to be, to not be able to master your emotions and regulate in that second and take a step back and have perspective of like, I'm with you. We're going to figure this out together. Let's take a beat. Let's think about this, versus immediately going into, because this is happening right now, this is how it's always going to be. You know, like that's really how I used to be and how I see my parent even acting now. And I mean, he's been doing it his whole life. It must be so difficult to try to change it now, which is why it's so important to even just, again, cultivate that awareness of the voice wherever you are at this very moment, right? Like start now, just the awareness. You don't have to change it right away. But I would say that now, yeah, it's just kind of like an inner, we got this. It's an inner, you don't have to respond right now. It's an inner kind of like coach, maybe almost of, like I can trust her because she'll always make it okay for us, like a true mother.
I think it goes back to self-regulating and like the tools that you used to even get yourself to that state of calm, to be able to separate out the inner mother, and that now that regulation is within you. Where do you feel like that regulation is challenged still?
Self-regulation is like a muscle that you build. You know, it's really all about increasing your capacity. And so in that sense, it comes from not self-avoiding, right? That's the only way in which one can increase their capacity, because if you really choose to be fully present to the depth of life's pain, you increase your capacity that way. And thus, again, with duality, also increase your capacity for joy. But you got to be there. You got to be willing to see it. And I think a lot of it comes from being honest with yourself. And again, going back to like taking personal responsibility. And I think whenever you approach something from a place of like, what is mine to take on here and what can I immediately take personal responsibility for instead of panic about in the situation, you kind of give yourself a sense of control back and thus have a greater capacity to approach life. So I think where I come up against some resistance there, where I'm like, I can still really work on accessing that capacity, is in my closest relationships that are love-based, whether it's your spouse, your partner, or a parent. Those are always going to be the stickiest, the most tricky, and the most triggering in a sense, where your capacity to immediately self-regulate and just be zen and good in every moment is going to be challenged because they are the shortest distance, right? Like they're so close to you. It's like it's in you, and it's hard to separate. You know, you can have expectations. You can want them to act a different way versus being able to have the zen distance of, this is how this person can show up right now. Here's what I can take responsibility for, because I can remove myself in the situation and see that maybe I could have said that nicer. Like that's kind of where the capacity for me comes from, or the regulation for me comes from. It came from being so honest with myself and in every moment questioning, what's mine here to own? Because that immediately calms your nervous system. That immediately, like, I used to think taking responsibility for my part in things would be a negative, a strike against my ego almost. So I would avoid taking responsibility for things or avoid criticism. But then I started to realize how much safety it felt I felt in my body when I simply accepted truth, because truth feels so much safer than avoidance or a lie. And so as soon as I was willing to accept the truth of my role in a dynamic, or the truth of in every moment how I could have shown up a little bit better, or the truth of the part of criticism I was receiving that did resonate, all of a sudden, like, you're freed by that because you just accept what is, and you don't have to spend so much energy fighting it and trying to lie to yourself. And so I think that's the biggest thing. And what I'm working on, even in my closest relationships, is when, for example, I use my dad as an example all the time, because right now there's so much happening with my mom's disease and her care changing. And so there's a lot of hard conversations happening. There's a lot of high emotions, and he is very much at the whim of his emotions. And sometimes I can go into that younger version of me mode, like before I did the work, when I individuated from my parents and chose to show up differently, I can kind of slip into those old patterns. And when I'm just moving from that place of like blame or criticism for him versus showing up with compassion, showing up with grace, showing up with self-responsibility, seeing the truth in that moment, seeing the truth of this is just how he's feeling right now and how he's choosing to express it versus taking it personally, that's where that self-regulation comes from. And I come back to myself. It's that objectiveness that we can have in every situation. My ego was that elephant that was taking up space in all my relationships and making them not as connected as they could be. It was that thing that was causing me to avoid criticism at all costs, even criticism that could be really helpful and strengthening to me and my character. We need pushback. We need criticism, right? It was keeping me like in my safe little tower, right? Even sometimes a victim mindset can come from the ego. And so it was, well, I'm just a victim to how I was raised. I can't change my eating habits, or I can't change this or that. Like, I think that was the thing that I had to fight against the most in order to see myself clearly. Because when you're seeing everything around you from the veiled lens of always trying to protect your ego, you're not actually seeing everything around you. You are filtering it at all times to coddle yourself, kind of, right? And and again, it's self-preservation, right? It's like, it's not being at that level of awareness yet. And that we're all on a journey at different levels of this. So this took me a long time to uncover, but I will say a really big part of what helped me to look at my own ego and the ways in which living to preserve that ego was not serving me, and the ways in which I was living just for myself, that self-centeredness, right? Because when you're constantly worried about protecting your ego, you're constantly thinking about yourself, and you don't have time to think about other people. You don't have time to be curious about other people. And it's actually a really unfortunate way to live, but we just can't see it when we're in it. I just couldn't see it. And I think the things that helped me the most were friends like distancing themselves from me and me having to finally ask why, because only when you're in enough pain will you ask why. Only when you're like really losing something that's important to you will you start to self-reflect maybe. And another big thing was my first ceremony with mushrooms. Really, I mean, I don't like to say that people need to do plant medicine in order to evolve and reach a different level of consciousness. I think your life can be plant medicine in itself, and you can learn from the pain, but it does certainly accelerate the lifting of the veil, or at least give you a minute of lifting of the veil. And then it's your job to hold on to that and not let the ego put it back down. So when I did my first mushroom ceremony, which I have an episode about too, it's my 28th birthday self-awareness episode. I had a really lucky series of events where that month I had actually started seeing a behavioral optometrist who looked at vision from a sense of how your vision affects your behavior and your personality. And she works with a lot of kids who have ADHD by helping to create less stress in their visual system by either giving them prescriptive glasses, doing visual strengthening exercises, using a prism in their glasses. I have one eye that turns in. I don't know if you've ever noticed it, but like sometimes I just look a little pug-eyed, as Nick calls it. And it's because one of my eyes does just have a tendency to focus in, especially when I'm tired or I'm stressed or I'm not in nature. Because nature is very peripheral, and man-made places where I'm just looking at you or just looking at my phone is very myopic and actually then makes us a little bit more selfish and focused on one thing and self-centered in a way. Like it actually narrows our vision and keeps us from considering all the things around us in a very spiritual way. And so much of our lives now spent on our phones. Like, what is that also doing to our personalities in a way? So by working with her, when she started to tell me that I had this myopic vision and my eyes were really good at seeing even the tiniest detail in front of me, but really couldn't see the things going on around me, I was like, and then Nick went to her and she told Nick he had the opposite, that he had really good peripheral vision, but he needed glasses in the opposite way because his eyes turned out. His eyes had the tendency to look outside of himself, and he had the tendency to self-efface and sacrifice his own needs to meet other people's. And my coping mechanism was the opposite. I had a tendency to ignore other people's needs in order to get my own met because no one ever met my needs. That dynamic, that trauma bonding of like, you're the perfect fit to my trauma. I need someone who I can meet all their needs to avoid myself, because as a kid, having needs was not safe. So I need to just pretend I have no needs and just focus on yours. And mine was, I need someone to meet all of my needs for me because I have no self-esteem whatsoever and cannot imagine loving myself or meeting my own needs. So I need someone to do all the work of loving me for me. And I was like, oh God, what have we done? So after that whole, I went to the optometrist, got that, she broke the news. It was a little devastating. The spiritual wheels started to turn. I got curious, and thank God for my curious brain. That's the only way that I've done any of this. I started to get curious about what could that mean in my life? What could my myopic vision mean in my relationships? What could it mean here? And the connection just started to be made. And so I inferred certain things about my behavior that I couldn't even see. I couldn't even see how selfish I was at the time. But the vision was like, oh God. And then at the end of that month, took the mushrooms, turned to Nick, said, my dad has the same eye that turns in and he's kind of selfish. Am I selfish? And Nick was like, yeah, I didn't want to say anything. I wanted to let you figure it out on your own. I'm like, 8 years later, bro, 8 years you waited for me to figure it out. And he was like, yeah. And thank God, he's one of my greatest teachers. He really taught me you can't tell someone something about themselves. You just can't until someone's ready to see it, until they learn it the hard way. until it comes from them. It's not going to mean anything to them. So I had to see it. And that night I cried. I said, oh my God, I really do think about myself too much. And it's exhausting for everyone around me and me. This is no way to live. Like, my to-do list isn't the most important thing in the world. What I want to watch on TV isn't more important than what you want to watch. Like, just all these things where it was just, I didn't even notice how insidious it was. So that was an ego death. And I since have been extreme, like it scarred me so much, thank God, that I since have I think about my ego every single day. Like I told you, I think in every conversation, am I taking up too much space here? Because I know I had a tendency to do that in the past. So let me just look out for that. Am I, checking in on this friend enough? Am I, making sure that I'm there for people? Like it's just knowing it's not a bad thing, right? Someone who has myopic vision, that's part of their gift, right? They can see things up close right here. That's why I can, look at a podcast social cut and be like, change this 1 second here and put this here. Like that's a gift to be able to see such immense detail and exactly what's in front of you and be able to tune out the world. I would have never been able to build my business if I did not have that natural tendency, probably due to my childhood and all the things where I had to just be alone in my room and focus on this one thing and tune everything else out and tune out the fighting and all the things, right? So it served me for a time. And then there's a time when you have to look at yourself and say, okay, now how is this also working against me? And when is it time to leverage that myopic gift? And when is it time to lock in and spend a week really working hard on a project and tuning out the world and letting people know, hey, I'm going to be out of touch for this week. I'm really working on this thing. Love you. I want to catch up with you when I'm back. Like, how can you utilize your myopic vision, quote unquote, your ego, the selfishness, all the things, to, in a healthy way, integrate your ego, right? There's a pathological ego that leads you to live a selfish life and think about yourself in every interaction and try to preserve protect yourself, try to protect yourself from all external forms of criticism. And I'm just living in my glass house. And then there's a healthy ego that is, I see my faults, but I also see my gifts. And I want to make sure that I can show up in the world with my gifts and integrity. So I'm also going to check myself, but I'm not going to say no to myself either. And I'm going to know when it's time to lean in here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you had to have that death. You had to have that elephant sit up in order for you to even realize that your inner child was running the show nonstop. Yeah. And then post that, you had to drag your inner child into just, how you said, throwing them in the shower every day and brushing their teeth and just making sure all of those things come up. And you kind of got to the other end of having the pros of having an inner mother, of having the presence of mind to sit in pure chaos and say, we got this. Mm-hmm. We're going to be okay. Mm-hmm. What were the unexpected gifts that you got during the journey of your ego dying and realizing your inner child ran the show that you...
It was just so much more fun to play with the other kids. My particular inner child pathology, right? The suppressed or unmet needs. Everyone's inner child's unmet needs are going to be different. Again, Nick's was so different from mine. He was just not seen at all. The youngest child, all the things, just make sure that you don't make a peep and don't have needs and you'll be safe, right? That's how he learned to be safe in the world. How I learned to be safe in the world was to perform, was to be the best, was to sing and dance and do all these things and get straight A's and blah, blah, blah. It was so opposite, was to be seen in that way. But that led to someone who was always focused on themselves versus for Nick, always focused on others. And so my particular downside of that unbalanced version of an inner child was that when your job is to constantly be the best, you're always thinking about yourself. And just like my favorite philosophy says, when you are living your life from a place of competition, when you're living your life from a place of vertical relationships where you think you can be above or below another and you don't see everyone as your equals, even if you always win, you will never know a moment of peace because you will never have a friend in this world. Everyone will just be your enemy. And so I'll never forget when I was a kid, my mom used to drive this girl to camp with me. She used to carpool us. The girl got everyone else a gift at camp and didn't get me a gift. And I'm like, what do you mean? My mom chauffeurs you to school. Like, you don't have a gift for me? And she goes, no, because you're too bossy. Again, needed that. Needed the pushback. Needed like people to check me. Maybe not, that was like harsh, but also, so what? Like I was a little bossy. And again, that's the healthy integration of the ego. I am bossy. I am CEO. I can do that in a healthy, good way. And I can lean into that natural bossiness, but also clearly sometimes it affects other people and I need to learn how to integrate it. So yeah, that led to no matter what, I just wasn't fun to play with because I just always wanted to win. And Nick would always tell me that. He'd be like, I just don't want to play games with you because you just want to win. Like it just it's not fun. And I was like, what do you mean it's not fun? Winning is fun. And he's like, no, like it's fun to play. I just didn't get it. And so my most unexpected benefit is that I thought that was what life was about and how dim was the potential fullness of my life if that's all that life was about. And now that life is about playing with the other kids, I have a full, beautiful, rich life. I have friends. I have genuine relationships. It's just the best thing ever.
What would you say the journey is from start to finish? You had to articulate the actual steps you did. Give us the steps.
I would say number one, it starts with just the basic start to take care of yourself. Wherever you are, wherever you can do better, the smallest first step, again, like just making sure that you're more consistent with your skincare routine, more consistent with making your bed. That's something you like to do. I don't love to do that still to this day, but whatever it is that you can take one step forward to treat yourself like a child and take care of yourself, start to do those things so that you can start to build the sense of self and the self-worth and realize, oh, I am a human worth taking care of. Build the foundation, which is your actual physical health. I think that cannot be understated. And I'm so happy that I started in my career, even like teaching about the physical, because all the stuff that I'm talking about now would not even be doable and wouldn't make much sense for someone who doesn't even have the physical foundation down. So I think everything that I've talked about up until now and all of the pillars that we've spoken about of balancing your blood sugar, eating really consistently, again, feed yourself like you feed a child, protein-rich breakfast, movement, hydration, herbal support, nervous system support, that physical health foundation, right? Working with the right practitioners that can support you, all of the advice that we've shared in the last 5 seasons, really like go there and take that physical health seriously so that you can cultivate that sense of safety within yourself. Then I would say once you have that safety, those like base needs are a little bit more met, start to get curious about your own behavior. Like I said, that curiosity is what got me through everything. Start to be willing each day to just be a little bit more honest with yourself. It's always going to feel like a risk. It's always going to feel maybe like a little bit of a blow at first, but once you settle into that truth of like, oh, but this is just true. So how scary can it be? Because it's the truth. That's going to be your way forward. And it is your responsibility to be honest with yourself. And that radical personal responsibility is one of my major steps and pillars. Then spend time with your inner child, question your inner voice. I think it's really important to constantly ask yourself, whose voice is this as you go through this journey? Because you're going to have steps back, right? You're going to, as we all do, take 2 steps forward, 10 steps back sometimes. And every time we reach a new height and do a new thing and start to maintain a new habit and our house is a little bit more organized, all of a sudden we're like, this is a little bit too perfect. I'm used to chaos. I feel like this is all going to go away. So now I'm going to start spiraling and shaming myself and sabotaging myself, and just expect that that's going to happen. But ask yourself, even write out the voice if you have to, write out the mean things you're saying to yourself and ask yourself, whose voice is this? Where have I heard this before? Because I realized that, especially in the ways I was being mean to myself about, I'm worthless, I'm never going to amount to anything, I'm fat, I'm ugly. Those were all the things that I heard my mom say to herself. All the things like, you live with this person in close quarters. We've heard our mothers, many of us, talk down to themselves or say these things. And she had such a hard time believing in the contribution she was making to the world or her art, or she didn't want to be seen. She just thought she had no self-esteem. So she spoke to herself in this really mean way. And we're little children. That is the base for our internal voice. So constantly ask yourself, whose voice is that? And name it. Naming things is so important. Again, just the awareness itself creates monumental shifts. Awareness is the only way to begin to change, and it is a valid first step. And just keep going with those tiny acts of self-discipline. Become a person that you can be proud of. And also give yourself that integrated, healthy inner mother to child time to play. Schedule in your playtime. The same way that you're putting all these Google Cal things in your phone to schedule your work time, and you're giving that your, the honor of being in your phone and taking up that much time of your day, schedule your hangouts with your friends in advance. Schedule your ice cream date with yourself in advance. Put on your schedule, I'm taking my inner artist to a cafe to draw on this day. Really treat that inner child and those parts of you, and treat yourself like someone who's worth hanging out with. Be your own friend. It's going to feel hard at first again, but just try. Just go to a cafe for an hour, take a solo trip, start to practice spending time with yourself. And then from there, your inner child can really start to feel safe and come out and play. And she's going to give you all types of ideas of, I want to do this next. And let's go here and talk to this person. And I'm curious, because she's the real originator of the curiosity, right? Curiosity is such a big tool, but she is the holder of it. Our inner children are so curious. You hear a child ask how many questions an hour, there's statistics around it. How many questions they ask you. Why this? But why that? And know that when you are in that curious mindset, when you're looking around and you're saying, I wonder what it is that makes the leaves on that tree turn red in autumn. Is it that the cold triggers some phytochemical release to make it red? When you catch yourself having those kinds of curious thoughts, you know your inner child is out and she's there and she's playing. And let her curiosity lead you to the next thing you're going to do and the next thing you're going to try. And just let her play and let her fail and let her know it's going to be okay.